Hey, good afternoon, everybody, uneducated economists. So I pulled this speech out of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and it's titled Monetary Policy Strategies for a Low Neutral Rate or Neutral Interest Rate World. And it was a speech given November 30th, 2018 by a John C. Williams, President and Chief Executive Officer. And what I would like to do is I wanted to try and do the whole speech for you, break it all down, but it is such a long speech that I just don't think it would make for a very good video to do the whole thing in one shot. So instead, what I would like to do is break it down into different parts. And the first part is just the introduction of it. And if the introduction goes well and you guys like this, then maybe we'll continue on with the rest of the speech. Otherwise, we can just can it and move on to something else. But I thought it was really important, some of the information that's in here, because I think it's going to kind of tell a lot about what's going to be said here by the Fed here in the next coming week or so. Anyway, it says here, I would like to start by thanking Tharman for the invitation to participate in this panel of esteemed current and former policymakers. I am also pleased to continue the long tradition of hosting the Group of 30 at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and very much look forward to this morning's discussion. In my remarks, I will focus on the following question. What long-run monetary policy strategy is best suited to anchor inflation expectations, foster price stability, and promote maximum employment? I emphasize the phrase long run because I will focus on the features of a systematic policy framework rather than a tactical policy decisions. This topic is not only of academic interest, as was recently announced, the Federal Reserve is embarking on a review of its long-run monetary policy framework. I will argue that the global decline in neutral rate of interest over the past quarter century poses significant challenges to maintaining well-anchored inflation expectations in a standard inflation targeting regime. I will then lay out some alternative policy strategies that have the potential of providing a solid anchor for inflation expectations, even with a very low neutral interest rate, while preserving broad continuity with current inflation targeting practices. Now, I know that I'm already way out on a limb. I should emphasize that my remarks reflect my own views and not necessarily those of the Federal Open Market Committee or anyone else in the Federal Reserve System. So let's kind of break this down a little bit and go back to the beginning of this paragraph here. And what it says here is what long-run monetary policy strategy is best suited to anchor inflation expectations, foster price stability, and promote maximum employment. Well, we kind of know what maximum employment and price stability is, but what does he mean by anchoring inflation expectations? And, pretty much as long as I can remember, the Federal Reserve has always tried to maintain the 2% inflation. Right, and apparently that's good for the economy to grow at 2%, and that's what I believe that he is stating there was with the best strategy that's suited for anchoring inflation expectations, and that's what I would only assume. So he goes on to say here, I emphasize the phrase long run because I will focus on features of systematic policy framework rather than tactical policy decisions. Right, so what he is saying there is that he has an idea that he has a systematic way of dealing with the interest rates as opposed to the tactical one where they take all the data and all these guys get together and they discuss it and then they come up with this idea of what interest rates should be. He's saying that he has a systematic version of that, so that you just kind of look at the numbers, or it'll just kind of judge itself. It says, hey, if the economy is doing this, then we do this, and if the economy does that, then we do this. And that's his systematic version is basically what he's saying, to break it down easy for you guys. This topic is not only of academic interest, as was recently announced, the Federal Reserve is embarking on a review of long-run monetary policy framework, right? And so, yeah, the Powell came out the other day and said that, the autopilot policy is coming to an end. Of course, they said that they were never on autopilot policy, but they were. You can go back and look, and you can see that the Fed fund rates has raised 0.25% every quarter for like the last 2 years, a year and a half, or whatever it was. But last week when Powell came out, he said that we're approaching neutral rates, right? Which basically saying, hey, we need to review what our monetary policy is, and that's what he's basically saying there by the Federal Reserve embarking on a review of the long-run monetary policy. I will argue that global decline in neutral rates, this is what he says here, I will argue that the global decline in neutral rate of interest over the past quarter century poses significant challenges to maintaining well-anchored inflation expectations in a standard inflation targeting regime. So what he is saying is that during last recessions, the interest rates were high enough that during the recessions we could drop the interest rates down to help stimulate the economy, right? So if you bring these interest rates down, then it gives people the ability to take out loans at a cheaper rate, right? So they can buy houses and cars and take out credit card debt and all that other stuff. And what he is saying is that right there, the global decline in neutral rate of interest over the past quarter century poses significant challenges to maintaining well-anchored inflation. So yeah, he's basically saying that since the 80s, when they raised interest rates way up, we've had all this room in order to stimulate the economy by dropping interest rates down. But he says that's over. Like, the global economy doesn't have enough higher interest in order to drop it down enough to stimulate the economy. He says that's going to be a problem. What it goes on to say, I will then lay out some alternative policy strategies to have the potential of providing a solid anchor for inflation expectations, even with very low neutral interest rates, while preserving broad continuity with the current inflation targeting practice, right? And then he goes on to say, now that I am already way out on a limb, right? And he means that because everybody else in the room was just like, okay, dude, you have an idea that you can maintain inflation during low interest rates and be able to like pick out that inflation target to say, hey, we can put it there or we can put it here. And everybody in the room was just like, come on, right? And that's why he says, I know I'm way out on a limb here, right? But I should emphasize that my remarks reflect that my own views and not necessarily of the Federal Open Market Committee or anyone else at the Federal Reserve. So although these aren't actual policies that they're talking about, this guy is pretty well in the know, and as far as discussion, the discussion of what the monetary policy should be, I'm sure this is probably right up there at the forefront, this whole speech. But anyway, that's the initial part. That's the introduction of it. If you guys like the video, let me know. We'll continue on and we'll do the rest of the speech, or you let me know if we just can it and move on to something else, okay? Thank you very much, guys. Uneducated economist. We'll talk to you soon.